To keep or to trade? That is the question with several key Cardinals this offseason. We'll take a look at some of the top names and weigh in with our thoughts coming up on b-schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Thursday, November 20th, 2025. And today on the show, we're going to talk more about the trade possibilities that could be happening for the Cardinals this offseason. And we'll use as our guide a recent post by Will Leitch at MLB.com. Will Leitch, of course, a Cardinals fan, has done the Seeing Red podcast with Bernie Miklasz for so many years, and love his insights on all things sports. But in particular, this time he's writing for MLB.com about the Cardinals and asking the question, or really posing the question, of whether the Cardinals should be trading or keeping 5 key players. So we'll go over the names that Will Leitch brought up, and I'll weigh in with my thoughts on them as well. And then we may explore a couple other options that he did not necessarily take a deep dive on, because I do think there are a number of names that could be moving for the Cardinals this offseason. But because nothing has happened yet, we're still kind of in that preliminary phase of waiting for the first domino to drop, and we'll see what that entails as time goes along. But I'll read to you some of the names that Will Leitch talked about in his article. We'll post in the video description for those who would like to take a gander at that, and then we'll get into it here on b-schaeff Daily. Nolan Arenado, obviously the first name mentioned here for this conversation, and for an understandable reason. The Cardinals tried like hell to trade Nolan Arenado last offseason, and it didn't end up working out. He declined the trade to Houston. There really weren't any other suitors that were on his list. Well, now the list is going to expand, and as Will Leitch writes, the case for trading Arenado is, of course, the desire to open up a spot on that infield for somebody else. J.J. Weatherholt is the obvious candidate here, and I talked about this topic with Joe Roderick earlier today on STL Sports Central, our Card Central 365 show, with J.J. Weatherholt being named Minor League Player of the Year by the Cardinals organization earlier this week, which was a no-brainer. Bryson Mott's on the pitcher side. I believe we alluded to this yesterday. He's got really not a lot left to prove, it feels like, at AAA. There might be some things that he could do, seasoning-wise, to be able to just get that much more ready for the big leagues. But sometimes you just aren't really going to be able to know what it's like to be a big leaguer and how to handle those rigors until you get a chance to do it. And it feels to me like JJ's already at that point where, look, I mean, he could go down there and rake in AAA, but sometimes raking in AAA does not equate to the big leagues, and you have to kind of get punched in the mouth a little bit. And delaying the inevitable of, if that's going to happen to a guy, allowing that to happen later rather than sooner, I don't necessarily see a lot of point in that. It's one of the reasons I advocated for Weatherholt to be given a cup of coffee at the end of September this past season. Obviously, that did not end up happening. It wasn't close to happening with John Mozeliak still running the team at that time. I think wanted to leave as much open to choice for Chaim Bloom as he possibly could, and putting Weatherholt on the 40-man roster when the Cardinals were going to have a lot of these 40-man decisions to make, as we saw happen earlier this week with the 4 guys that were added and Jorge Alcala DFA'd. Having Weatherholt in that mix would have meant another guy would have been DFA'd yesterday, right? Like if he would have already been on the 40-man. And you say, well, Brenden, eventually they're going to have to find a spot for him. You're right, but as we're talking about these names that could be traded, remember, these guys could fall off the roster, potentially being traded for guys who don't have to go on the 40-man. If they're dealt for, say, prospects, then that would open up some spots inherently. So Arenado, obviously, is a name on that list. You would clear up not only the lineup spot for Weatherholt, but a 40-man spot potentially for him as well. Now, the 40-man thing, that there are going to be a lot of changes made to the 40-man between now and when the Weatherholt decision is going to be made. But I do believe one of them is Arenado. And, he writes that the case for keeping him is that it's a lot of money to eat, and does it reduce the likelihood of Arenado wearing a Cardinals hat on a potential Hall of Fame plaque? Yeah, maybe. But I don't know that necessarily that was particularly likely anyway. I would say as of right now, when you think about Arenado, the impact of his Colorado years still probably takes the cake, even though the way that it ended there was, him asking out and wanting to force a way to the St. Louis Cardinals. But his time with the Cardinals was underwhelming. And so I don't know that the Cardinal hat in the Hall of Fame is necessarily something that would happen anyway. So that's not really a consideration here. And Will agrees, says, no question, if the Cardinals can find a taker, they'll send him. And they will. I've said repeatedly that the Cardinals will not have Arenado on the team when they get to spring training, and I'm gonna stand by that. I don't know how soon it's going to happen, but I would be shocked if it doesn't. Yes, it's a lot of money to eat, but you're to the point where, look, if you're going to not be this, the criticism last year was that's the half in, half out with the rebuild. If you're going to not be accused of being half in, half out, and really being able to push all of your momentum toward developing the future, even if that means, hey, more at-bats for a Thomas Saggese. Do we think Saggese is a long-term fixture? I don't know. Probably not would be my lean right now. He might be a nice utility piece, but what if he surprises me? What if he really puts in the work and improves relative to his numbers from last year? Suddenly you're like, oh, because we cleared the deck a little bit, we were able to learn this, and the Cardinals are not trying to contend and win 90 games this year. I mean, they'll try to do that. The players on the team will, but from a roster building standpoint, that's not the goal. And so having anybody like an Arenado around who is overpaid for what he's going to produce anyway, just doesn't make sense. So at a certain point, you got to eat the money. Yes, the case for trading Arenado seems evident. The next one, Willson Contreras, talks about the money in terms of the case for trading him. And yeah, the fact that, he can still hit pretty well means he might have some value, and you might not have to eat a bunch of money to unload Willson Contreras. And that would be cost savings for ownership. That would be potentially savings that they could apply to a starting pitcher if they would choose to do so, which is important to me. I think it would be important to Cardinals fans to say, hey, look, if you're going to trade away Arenado and save some money there, if you're going to trade away a Willson Contreras, save some money there, we'll talk about Sonny Gray as well. That's great. Just to do it to save money, though, doesn't actually benefit the Cardinals or their fans, benefits ownership. But if you would say, hey, we're saving X amount, and then at least be willing to apply a portion of those savings toward building up the roster for the next couple of years in another area with like a 2-year contract for a starting pitcher that they could certainly use as they wait and try to be patient enough with the prospects that are on the way, like Quinn Matthews, like a Liam Doyle, I would say that would be money well spent. And that would be a way to reorganize the roster that it's not strictly like rebuildy. It's just better allocation of the resources that you're willing to spend. And the payroll will be lower, so it's going to all work out in that regard. But I would think that part of this conversation is if you do trade a Willson Contreras, which, of course, the case for keeping him is that he has all the say-so in this conversation. He wants to be a Cardinal. He's beloved by Cardinals fans. Like, don't you want to throw the fan base a bit of a bone there and say, hey, you at least, if you're going to come to the ballpark, can continue to root for this player that, bleeds red and really wants to be here. I think that's a positive to be able to include into the conversation. But he does also have the no-trade clause. So is it worthwhile to spend a lot of emotional energy and actual energy in terms of your offseason to-do list to try and find a trade for Willson Contreras if you could get to the end of that road and find out he doesn't want to go anyway? But I would say that he's a guy that has trade value because of what he brings at the plate. The Seattle Mariners were kind of thrown around as a possible fit for Contreras. They did sign Josh Naylor to a long-term contract, so that might kind of nip that in the bud. But there might be teams that are willing to look for, even if it's not behind the plate, even if it's, not first base, but he can do either of those two things. I think realistically can contribute in those regards and could just be a DH if he needs to be. Maybe there'd be a team that would throw him into the outfield. I think the bat with the 2 consecutive seasons of, 800 OPS or whatever it is that he's had, we can pull up his stats here. His numbers went down a little bit this past year, just to 791 OPS, but 848 the year before that, 826 the year before that, doing that in St. Louis with, the Busch Stadium curse half the time. I think he could maybe even increase those power numbers a little bit if he played in a different ballpark. So the value that Willson Contreras could bring in a trade, and then conceivably with the $18 million contract that he carries for the next couple of years, conceivably you could reallocate that to a starting pitcher. Like, let's say you sign a starting pitcher to an identical contract. Would that be more valuable to the Cardinals than Contreras in terms of just like the dollars and cents of it? I know that you can't really quantify his value to the team in the clubhouse and your enjoyment as a Cardinal fan watching him, but you could make the case that they could plug Alec Burleson in pretty capably at first base and not have as much of a drop off, have him fit more efficiently into your lineup than trying to plug Burleson into a corner outfield spot, which he improved on his outfield skills. There's no doubt about that. But I think when you look at what the Cardinals don't have, it's that they don't have a bona fide number 2 in that rotation, right? Really even a number 1. They could use help in the rotation. So if there's a way to reallocate and maybe pick up a prospect in so doing, and Willson is happy with the outcome, that would be the case for trading him. I personally would like to see him remain. Maybe it's selfishly. He's a good guy to cover. He's a good guy to watch. He's always going to do something interesting. And I like Willson Contreras. But I could see the angle if the Cardinals are willing to then extend and say, if we're saving this money, we're going to reallocate it into starting pitching. And instead of signing a 2-year deal for a $9 million starting pitcher, we sign a $15 million starting pitcher per year because we save the Wilson money and can do it that way. That might be a benefit to it because you've got corner outfielders that you're trying to use, right? You want to see more of Jordan Walker, even if it's not projecting to go really well. I think it makes sense to want to, as he still continues to be very affordable and there's that promise of potential upside that you could realize, you might as well roll him out there is maybe the attitude. Is Lars Nootbaar still going to be here? That's obviously another name with the corner outfield stuff. But, there are other guys that you're looking to potentially get involved in that regard. Maybe you go out and get a right-handed hitting outfielder to complement a lot of your lefties. That could fit in and replace Contreras in that regard. Maybe not positionally, but if Burleson is playing more first base and you get a decent right-handed bat for your outfield, again, on the cheap. I'm not saying that they're going to do a whole lot to negate the rebuild and to spend a bunch of money, but that could be an idea. So there's kind of the pros and cons of the Wilson stuff, and I personally would like to see them keep him, but I would be intrigued to see what kind of return they could get if they find a suitor and a place that Wilson is, of course, willing to go. Brendan Donovan, the next name on this list in the article that we're referencing here by Will Leitch for MLB.com. And he's the name that we have talked ad nauseum about. The case for trading him is that he's the most valuable asset the Cardinals have. And lots of reports that he's drawn a lot of interest and does seem likely to be traded. That's according to Mark Feinsand. Yeah, that is, I believe, accurate. I've said all along. I've told you since, I believe, the day that Katie Wu wrote kind of early September or mid-September about the kind of the rebuild word, maybe a little bit more of a reality when it comes to the 2026 season under Chaim Bloom. I was like, oh, yeah, they're definitely, and I'm disappointed in that. I don't think it's the route that they need to go full-fledged into. I think you can do some of these rebuilding activities like trading away bloated veterans like an Arenado, like a Sonny Gray, check in on the Wilson Contreras stuff, while then recommitting to your fans that you're not going to stink on ice for the next 5 years, right? You can say, hey, we're going to sign Brendan Donovan because in 3-4 years, he's still going to be a really good player. And by that time, we're going to be a really good team. And so he can be a contributor toward that rather than say, well, we've only got 2 years of team control left over him. Then we're going to have to pay him. And by that, the next 2 years, we're not going to be very good as a team. And by the time we get around to it, are we really convinced that Donovan's still going to be playing at this level? His value is maybe better to us in a trade than to keep him and have to pay him. I think that's the cheap way out, in my opinion, because I would venture to guess, like the Tommy Edman contract ended up being a nice one that the Dodgers signed him to. And a lot of comparisons always to Edman versus Donovan. Donovan's the better player. Edman got a 5-year, $74 million contract extension, which I thought was maybe even a little good for Tommy Edman, but like a little bit hefty for the contributions he brings offensively. I would say that Edman's contributions exceed Donovan's defensively. Both have been given the accolades as utility glovers for sure. But I would say Edman may be a little better of a more versatile fielder. Like he can play center field. That's valuable compared to Donovan kind of hanging out in the corner outfield spot. So definitely give the edge to Edman there defensively. And the Dodgers clearly have seen the value in that, and they've used him all over the field where they've needed to, and they paid him thusly, right? That was their plan all along. With Donovan, I would say the value certainly comes more from his bat, and you like what he brings at the plate. It exceeds what Edman can do. The upside there is far more significant. But contract-wise, would it be all that different from the 5-year, $74 million that Edman got? I would say, yeah, it'd be a little bit more because as much as you'd like to get paid for defense, offense is really what makes the world go round. But would it be a 5-year, $80 million contract? I think in the case of Edman, he was bought out of only 1 year of arbitration eligibility, whereas if you did it right now with Donovan, it would be 2 years. And so that would be a reason that I know that might get into the weeds a little bit, but basically Donovan's salary for the next 2 years is going to be capped by arbitration. It's going to increase from what it was. You might be $6 million, then $8 or $10 million or $12 million, whatever it would be, but it's not going to be what he would be able to get as an AAV, an average annual value on the open market. And with Edman's deal of 5 years and $74 million, I'm trying to look into this now. No, I could be. No, I might be wrong about this. The deal tore up the final season. No, I am right. If I would read before I would talk, it would help me. This was reporting from Jeff Passett on the Edman deal that was signed a year ago in November. The deal tears up the final season of a 2-year contract that Edman signed, and that was when he was with the Cardinals. They bought him out of the final 2 years of ARB, and it replaces with it one that runs from 2025 through 2029. So trying to dial in on the average values of this, that first year of the 5-year contract, which Edman just enjoyed, he was going to be making, It was a 2-year, $16.5 million deal. So I don't remember if it was front loaded, back loaded, whatever, but like $8 million, $8 to $9 million Edman would have been making. And that was kind of in line with what they thought he would probably earn in ARB. And so you're baking that in. And then for the final 4 years of the deal, you would then be able to escalate and bump that salary up a little bit more highly. And so about the average annual value for those other Edman years is in that kind of 15 to 16 million-ish range. There was a signing bonus. The Dodgers do all sorts of things to obfuscate and obviously make their payroll run more smoothly. And they've got the cash up front, so they'll do the signing bonus, and then there's probably deferrals. Yeah, 1/3 of the deal is deferred. They're just doing the arithmetic and the legalese to make it all sing as they so often do, because they have so much cash on hand. It allows them to do a lot of that signing bonus stuff, which then doesn't count against your luxury tax in the same way, and it's a reason they're allowed to do or able to do a lot of what they do. But generally speaking, as we're just kind of thinking about the value of Edman's contract, trying to compare it to what Donovan would make, it's in that, to me, if Edman's kind of valued around that $16 to $17 million range per year for the free agent years, that would mean for Donovan, you would look at it and go like, okay, $6 million, $10 million for the next 2 years, call it 16. And then let's say Donovan's a little more valuable. So he might even, I don't know that he would make $20 million a year. We're eventually going to get to find out. But I think it would be more like an $18 to $19 million a year valuation for Donovan. Could be wrong. But even if it is 20, let's say that you give him the $20 million per year on a 5-year contract for those 3 free agency years. So that's 3 years and 60. Tack on 2026 and 2027 for Donovan, which would be the 2 years he's still ARB eligible. And I'm just pulling numbers out of the sky, $6 million, $10 million, just to kind of say, give an estimate. 5 years, 76. If that feels light, and again, the reason it would be lighter than Edman's is because there's 2 years that are arbitrarily, or I should say artificially capped, because they're ARB eligible years rather than free agent eligible years. And so that's why that would be the case. You cannot always just look at the years and the number of dollars, because there are other factors at play. How much team control is being bought out? In Edman's case, it was just 1 year when the Dodgers signed that deal. In Donovan's case, it would be 2 years. But I would say let's offset that by the fact that Donovan's a better hitter and call it 5 years and $80 million contract with some buyouts on an option on the back half, even if it's 5 and 85. Is anybody going crazy going, that's outrageous money for Donovan? I don't think so. Like, I don't think Brendan Donovan on a 5-year contract in this instance is getting $100 billion. If he waits till the end of his arbitration eligibility period to sign that contract, if it comes in free agency, like for him, ideally he gets traded and that new team signs him to that contract right now. If he's got to wait it out and continues playing at this level, then maybe of a 5-year deal, all 5 years are going to be free agent eligible years. You could get that 5-year, $100 million contract. But at that point, you do have to recognize that the contract would end for him 2 years later in terms of his aging curve. If you did it right now, what is Brendan Donovan? He's 28 years old, but he'll turn 29 in January. So if you did it now, it'd be your age 29, 30, 31, 32, 33 seasons. If he were to wait 2 more years to sign a free agency contract, he is going to run into, in my estimate, what a lot of guys in their 30s run into when they get into free agency is like, teams don't really want to commit to guys for 5+ years when unless they're like superstar players, when the contract is going to be eclipsing and ending when you're like in your age 36 or 37 season. So like, it's a benefit to everybody to say, all right, I get it. I would be buying out some of these ARB years and maybe not trying to maximize and squeeze every penny that I can get for my final 2 years of arbitration eligibility. But the benefit to me would be that I don't have to wonder what it's going to be like to face free agency in an era where I'm 31 and there's been a CBA change. The CBA change could benefit a player like Donovan by the time it comes around, or it could go against him. We have no idea. But just talking through all of that, the bottom line, I know I've talked a long time about this, and I'm actually going to put this Donovan thing in a separate video because I think it's an interesting topic. He's the most compelling player that the Cardinals have to potentially trade, and this contract stuff, the minutia of it, is a reason that I believe the Cardinals should just sign him, because it's not going to be this crazy contract that you're looking back and going, oh my goodness, even if my estimates aren't conservative enough, and Donovan is a guy that's going to get $20+ million a year, which I think it would be very difficult for anybody to tell you today definitively, because they don't know how his next 2 years are going to go on the field, and they also don't know what 2027 is going to look like when it comes to the CBA, and if we're even going to have a season in that year. And so as that happens, you're going to be in a situation where you're aging through that, and you might not be playing your age 30 or your age 31 season type of deal. That's going to change things a lot in a way that I don't think we can anticipate. And look, it may be to a point where because of that, a guy like Donovan would be more willing to sign an extension right now. It may be the opposite. It may be that he's like, look, I'm this close. We might get a really beneficial deal. If there's a salary cap, that's going to be one thing. But if there's a floor, that might mean there are teams around the league that have to sign players like me to $20+ million average annual values just to get to the floor. Like, we have no idea what's going to come. And I can't speak for Donovan in the way that he's viewing that. My guess is he's not really thinking that much about it, and he'd let the agent handle it. But certainly the opportunity to be traded and to be locked up for what you're considered as fair value would also, I think, be a boost for a guy like him. So we'll see what ends up happening. But the merits for trading him is this idea that he's the most valuable asset that you can trade. But if you're trading him just because you're back in that conversation about trying to clear a spot, you clear a spot with an Arenado. You clear a spot with Nolan Gorman, who, if you don't get a lot back for him, that's okay. He's kind of peaked as what we expect him to be. He's going to hit for power. He's going to strike out a lot, and his defense is going to be so-so. And he's going to be a solid big leaguer, but not somebody that you necessarily build around or start thinking about a second contract for. Trade those guys to clear a spot. Don't trade a Brenden Donovan to say, we got to clear a spot. If you're trading Brenden Donovan, it's because he is the most valuable asset on the trade market, not only for the Cardinals, but maybe in all of baseball on the position player side. And you think you can get a haul for him that can help jumpstart your rebuild, even though it pains you because you agree with my assessment that, like, maybe the Cardinals think, Donovan's still going to be a good player at age 31, 32, 33 as well. But we just think we can get more for him in a trade so that we can have, maybe our crack at 2 or 3 Brenden Donovans by the time 2028 arrives. And, we can get multiple players of his caliber that would be on the cheap, and then we can spend our money in 2028 somewhere else because there's going to be other needs for those teams. Like, that might be the way that they view it, and if they get a haul for him, they're right. That's the case for trading him. The case for keeping him, though, is, as I've outlined, I just don't think the contract would be so demonstrably overweight that you would be worried about, it going bad for a guy who is a gamer, is a hard worker, a team leader, all those things that can be very difficult to quantify. And you would be talking about signing him through his age 33 season. It's not like you would be, beholden to the back end of it. Yeah, you'd probably have to pay a $5 million option buyout on a contract that you don't want to pay him by the time he's about to turn 34. But maybe he ages gracefully and it goes the other way. I think it's the exact type of guy that you would look to sign unless you were conceding the next 2 years, which Chaim Bloom said they're not going to do. They're not conceding anything. Well, I don't know. This is a tough one. If they trade him, it's always going to be about, in my opinion, what did they get back and was it worth it? And we'll evaluate that when the time comes, if it happens. The next name on this list, Sonny Gray. Case for trading him, a lot of money that you could potentially clear because teams could be desperate for pitching. They'll probably not look at Sonny Gray and say he's worth $35 million, but they might say he's worth $20, and that would mean the Cardinals save about $20 because he's owed $35 plus a $5 million buyout for an option on 2027, which, if the Cardinals save $20 million and somebody else pays him the other $20 and they get a piece back for him, that's great. I think that works out because then you probably do have to make sure you've got the coverage from the other starting pitchers in your organization. Like Andre Palante is definitely in. Maybe a Kyle Leahy is somebody that, is going to be in anyway, depending on what they do. And then you're ready for the prospects like a Liam Doyle, like a Quinn Matthews, like a Bryson Motts, some of those guys. Hopefully by the midsummer, 1 or 2 of those guys have emerged to the point that you're comfortable putting them into a big league rotation. And you didn't really even need Sonny Gray for the full season, and he can go somewhere where he can contend as he ages, and everybody wins. That's the case for trading him. Case for keeping him is if you feel like you don't have enough starting depth to be able to afford to do it, or if there's obviously nowhere that he is willing to go, you're out of luck because he's got a no-trade clause. But I would also say that, if the Cardinals are honest about it, they could probably find a place that he'd be willing to go and just accept that you may have to eat more of the salary than you otherwise would want to. But he's one where I could see Chaim Bloom being a little stubborn and saying, look, Sonny Gray can contribute for our team. He had 180 innings last year, 200 strikeouts. Yes, the ERA was elevated. Yes, for the last 2 years, he's given up more home runs for whatever reason, has not, translated on the road with the number of homers that he's given up. Don't know what the deal is with that, but he's still a good pitcher near his prime relative to his age. Like, you look at his age and you think he's probably out of his prime, but he's still pitching pretty well and still showing the upside, certainly in some of the games that he pitched last season, the complete game shutout. I mean, he's got some really good things that he can still do for you. The consistency isn't always there, and so you kind of have to wear that a little bit. But the Cardinals have already committed to paying him this money, and so if it's a case where they feel as though they're not really gaining either in prospect capital or in cash savings what they would need to trade him to the places that he is willing to go, you could hold him and revisit at the trade deadline. And the problem there is also going to be, is Sonny Gray going to want to pick up in the middle of a season with his personality being what it is and move somewhere else for the stretch run? Maybe, but maybe not. You just kind of cross that bridge when you get to it. I just feel like keeping Gray on a team that is unlikely to exceed expectations enough to make the playoffs is probably not the best allocation of resources, but I will acknowledge the difficulty of you have to get him to be on board with whatever the result is, because he does have the no trade clause. So we'll see what ends up happening with that. Lars Nootbaar, case for trading him would be the StatCast darling still has enough trade value to potentially have the Cardinals extract on that value and just get out from under the situation before maybe he reveals that the StatCast stuff is a mirage and he's never going to be able to stay healthy. But I think you can still trade on his potential. You'd be able to do it even more, though. The case for keeping him is that he is currently injured and may not be ready for opening day. That is not something Will Leitch in the article mentions his injury issues, but doesn't mention that he is currently maybe not available for opening day, which could have an impact on his trade value at this point in time. And so if you're selling low on a guy that, if you bet on him and he's healthy and performs closer to what he did in 2024 than 2025, and you still want to trade him, I think there are teams that in July would take a year and a half of Lars Nootbaar, and probably the timing would line up better for them to pay you for it because they might be more desperate to add a player like Nootbaar to a championship contender or a hopeful contender. The problem is, if you're betting on Lars Nootbaar's health, you might lose that bet. And so the Cardinals may, be waiting for a day of his value to reach a level that it never will reach if he's not able to stay healthy. I don't know the right answer to this because I don't know realistically what the league is offering for Lars Nootbaar right now, given all of the factors at play. He does have still 2 years remaining, just like Brendan Donovan before free agency, but he is much less in that boat of a player that you're willing to extend because of the injury stuff. I guess it would have been fair to bring it up with Donovan, though, too. He has had a number of injuries as well, ended the season having a sports hernia surgery. And so that might be the unspoken part of the Cardinals' willingness to trade him is like, look, if everybody's talking about Lars Nootbaar as a reason with the trade talks and the value of what he brings, and they look at his injury past as a reason to not value him as highly, but nobody seems to be doing that right now with Brendan Donovan, this might be the time to trade Brendan Donovan. If that is just the popular opinion of everybody, that kind of can work in the Cardinals' favor when it comes to Donnie, less so with Nootbaar. And so, it's always about playing the market, which was something that John Mozeliak could not have been worse at. He was abysmal at the notion of buying low and selling high. I've never seen anybody do a worse job of it than him. Chaim Bloom, maybe they look at it in this front office a little bit differently and say, look, we think X about Brendan Donovan, which might be we love him, right? But the market thinks Y about him, and Y happens to exceed X. So you cash in, you make the trade. Lars Nootbaar, if the Cardinals think X about him and X exceeds Y in this instance because the rest of the team seem to be punishing Lars Nootbaar in terms of what they're offering via trade relative to what the Cardinals believe his injury risk to continue playing is, then maybe the Cardinals say we keep him and we revisit in July. So that would be an interesting conundrum that I can't know the answer to. It depends on their internal evaluations of these two players versus what they're seeing and hearing from teams in the market. I guess we can say John Mozeliak didn't feel as though Lars Nootbaar was being valued very highly in the offers they got for him in July because he said, none of those left-handed bats that we were getting calls on, we were not blown away by the offers for them. Again, you have to consider the source with this and maybe think that John Mozeliak just wasn't very good at this aspect of the job, and I would say that would be a fair evaluation based on what we saw from him. All right, those are the 5. I didn't really give you anything definitive on any of them because, like I said, with Nootbaar and Donovan, it's a value proposition. With Gray and really the other two, it's a case of what are they willing to do. But I would say the Cardinals should be motivated to trade Sonny Gray, extremely motivated to trade Arenado. It does not matter what you get back, just do it. Doesn't matter how much money you have to eat, just do it. Gray, there is that kind of pendulum swinging where you go, do understand that if we do trade him, we have to replace him with somebody in our rotation to just kind of get us by. And if he accidentally has a really great start to the season, maybe we can trade him to the perfect spot and end up with a really nice piece as a result relative to what we're being offered for him now. Wilson Contreras is a value proposition / maybe keep a little bit of the goodwill by keeping him, especially if you're going to trade Donovan. Trading Wilson and Donovan in the same offseason could be a little bit of a tough hit for the fans to take. Some of the other names that Will Leitch mentions in this piece for MLB.com in passing. Jordan Walker, I would say no chance I'm trading him because you're not going to get anything for him. Unless I'm just wrong about what teams will offer for him, then there's no chance. Kind of similar with, actually, it's not similar with Gorman. I would trade Gorman. I would trade Gorman for sure if I thought I was getting fair value, because at the end of the day, I could put Sajacy into the exact same spot that Gorman would occupy on my team, and I'm not going to get the power, but I think I could get similar wins above replacement. And if somebody is willing to bet on Gorman's power, again, value proposition, play the market, I would be willing to trade Gorman, because I don't think he's a guy that beyond his team control, I'm itching to give him an additional contract, because the volatility of his game is, I'm pessimistic about it relative to seeing the hope of like the 40 home run seasons consistently. I'm more on the pessimist side of that, but that could change with more performance from him, for sure. He mentioned some of the catchers, Pozo, Pages, Crooks. I would say Pozo, I don't think has any trade value. If he is to depart, it might just be as a DFA. I could be wrong about that, but I'm just not sure he has a lot of value. Pages, I would be surprised if they would trade him. I think the Cardinals value him more than the league would. Jimmy Crooks, the league might value him more than the Cardinals do. I don't know how the league values him, so I can't really say that for sure. But if they're trying to trim from the catcher pipeline and they think Leonardo Bernal is much more the answer of the young guns than Crooks, and there's people who think that Crooks is worth being included in a trade that the Cardinals can get something they need, I would definitely see them to do that. But those are really the only names that I think are worth bringing up. Which ones did I miss? Which ones would you like to hear more about when it comes to the Cardinals potentially making some trades? I can talk about that in a future episode of B-Schaeff Daily. But that's going to do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening, and we will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.